Okay, guys, welcome to the second half of the session. I already sent you an invitation, but those who didn't see it, I'm going to send it again. So in the second half, I'm going to discuss more and more stuff with this. So basically, if you go to the Moodle page now for our course and refresh it, I already uploaded the example that I completed right now. You can see the activity network diagram example there. Just click on it and you'll be able to see the PDF file that I created using the Lucid Graph. And the PDF file is there already. You can use Lucid Graph for many different purposes. I mean, I am using it and you can use it as well. You can also use other tools if you want to. Okay, there are many different software tools that you can use. And I think this course is a very good reason why you should learn all of these tools to develop your abilities in software engineering practices. Okay, so like I said before, software engineering is not about only programming. There are many different tools that we use, and this is a good excuse to learn them. So my question is there anyone who didn't understand this? Or who wants to ask further questions? So everything is clear. Okay, since you understood it, I'm not gonna solve more exercises. I thought I thought this was gonna be challenging, to be honest, because I was thinking to solve maybe one or more exercise, but since you understand it, I'm sure you can solve this one. So I'm gonna leave those to you. There are more exercises here, as you can see. Some of them I didn't even provided the answers, so it is your own responsibility to solve them. Yes, Ravant. Yes, Ravant, you raise your hand. Do you have a question? Okay, this guy doesn't want to talk. Another person, Sostenes, you have a question? Hello, can anybody hear me? Okay, some people are raising their hands but not asking questions. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. You can unmute yourself when you want to ask a question. Yes, I unmuted you now. If you want to talk, you can talk.
Oh yes, so I can talk now. You can, doctor. I saw the flow chart which you explained to us, like before this.
It's not a flow chart. It's an activity network diagram.
So about this diagram, because previously I took a long time, like maybe 2 semesters ago, I used to take the programming course. The way that, for example, the shape of these diagrams, which is like put, for example, the circle shape means start. The cube one means like a process.
It's a rectangle. The rectangle is task. The ellipse one is for milestones and start and finish. So there are like two different shapes. The rectangle shows the task. The ellipse one shows the milestone. But technically, start and finish are also milestones. Okay, so they have the same shape.
Thank you. I understood now, because I forgot the name, like I forgot what they were doing.
Okay, if you actually draw a Gantt chart, you will see that the start and finish in the Gantt chart is actually, when you start a finish, it's actually a milestone. So when you start a project or when you finish a project, those are actually milestones as well, okay? It's the same thing. So every time you draw an activity network diagram, you actually take start and finish as milestones as well. Does that make sense? Well, I hope it does. So because you understood this, I'm going to give you some homework. So make sure to complete these 3 exercises. There's one which I gave you the answer down there, just check it yourself, and 2 which I didn't. So complete them by next lecture, and if you have questions to me, ask them. Okay, so I'm not going to solve all of these since you said you don't have any problem with them, so make sure to complete them by next lecture. An alternative way to activity diagram is the Gantt chart, which again you can create it from Lucidgraph. And what Gantt chart does is basically a more visualized version of activity network diagram. Gantt charts are much more frequently used when we are concerned about projects. And what it does is that instead of going into a graphic and following up the milestones, you just see the whole thing from start to finish. So you read it from left to right with bars, charts showing the activities, where they start and where they end. Some activities shown on the Gantt chart can be shared bars, which indicates the flexibility of the completion date, which is computed by the scheduling tools themselves as well. So whenever you draw a Gantt chart, you can see that some areas can be shaded or just overlapping. This means that there is the flexibility in completion date. This means that the date can be excluded. So the Gantt chart can also show you from start to finish the dates and everything, and this will done in an overlapping way. However, I find it quite difficult to find the estimated time like this. Unless you are a very professional person, it might be a bit difficult to find out. So perhaps using both tools at the same time could be the most useful approach if you want to calculate the end date. So you just draw the activity diagram first, calculate the critical path, calculate the estimated time, bug fixing whatsoever. And based on this, now you can go and draw the Gantt chart itself. That is probably the most professional approach so that you prevent any kind of mistake. Because when you see overlapping tasks like this, it can be difficult to find out which one is coming first and which tasks are basically overlapping which other task and so forth. So the combination of the two will probably give you the best results. So in the final part of our course today, I'm going to talk about risk management, which is the last task of project managers. So as we, at the beginning of the course, we talk about 3 important jobs of project managers. One of them is people management. We talk about the diversity of the work environment, how we should treat people. We talk about approaches of the organizations and companies today and how they are approaching to this. Today we talk about project estimation. So, and in the final part, we're going to talk about risk management. Now, there are 3 important categories of risk management. And a risk is basically concerned with identifying and minimizing the effects of what could hurt the project itself. It is the probability that some circumstance can happen and delaying or completely damaging the schedule of the project. And we identify these circumstances as risks. There are 3 important risks that you should know or you should be aware of. There are project risks, which are basically affecting the resources and the schedule. There are production risks, which affect the quality or performance of the software. So not necessarily the project schedule is affected. So project can be released on the date still, but the quality might not be the same as you originally planned. And finally, there are business risks, which affect the overall business rather than only the project itself. It can happen the entire business that you are running, such as when a new technology emerges, this can affect the business model of the company. So when we look at the some examples in the risk management. We can see the project risk are possibility a delay in the system, which can be related anything that could relate it with the current state of the project itself, either the schedule or the resources. When we consider about product risk, we talk about any change, failure, or primary circumstances that can affect the end product quality. So this is more about the quality of the product rather than a resource or the time schedule. Let's say that this September you want to release a mobile application and you want to support uh, some functionalities there, such as chat among the users. Somehow you realize, you come to the conclusion that that feature is not going to be supported when you release the software. This affects your product as a product risk, because a feature that you originally planned is not going to be placed in your product, hence it will be affected. The final category is business risk, where the model changes, so or some circumstance happen that affect people, so you are kind of like driven to change the business model of the company. So there could be many examples to give in this regard. So a risk should fall into one of these categories, but in reality, many of the risks that are available falls into more than one category at once. So when something happens, it doesn't only affect the product, it could affect the product and the business. It could only affect the project or product. It could only affect a business, but it could also affect all three or two of them. Such as whenever you are missing an essential hardware for the product, for the mobile application to be delivered or something else, this will affect the product and the project itself, because it is a resource. A hardware is a resource, but it is also about the quality of your software, so it will affect both categories. Okay, a technological change, for example, a new technology emerged and now it's risking your business. Let's say that machine learning algorithms are on the rise and you have a business for the last 6-7 years and your business were running quite well, but suddenly this new technology, machine learning, had risen and you have done nothing about it, you don't know anything about it, and you are afraid that it will affect you as a risk. When we talk about a big technological change in our industry, it actually falls into all three categories. It will affect our resources and time, it will affect the product, it will also affect our business. So more often than not, when a risk happens, it actually affects all three categories at once. You can find some possible software risk on the given diagram that I gave you. These are taken from the book, and in the book you can even find more examples. The risk management process is basically something that all project managers should be involved. And to do this management process, we follow up 4 important steps. These are identification, analysis, planning, and monitoring. So at all times, whatever the step you are in the project, the risk should be identified, analyzed, planned, and monitored. This is why project managers should be involved in all steps of the project, not only the development, but also the maintenance, the analysis, the design, and so forth. Because when there is a risk, there is the possibility that it could affect the business, the product, and the project itself. Whenever you identify risks, what you do is that you make sure that who is going to affect it from this risk. So you can basically divide the risk into one or more categories, like what we did in here, but you also decide what is going to be affected from this, such as is it a technological risk, Is it affecting the people, organization, resources, and so forth? This task, where this is the first step of project management, is called risk identification. It is kind of like a checklist that you check up which risk can affect what, which part of the category. Let's say, is it the product only, project, or a business? Once you have done this, the risk should be analyzed. The probability and the seriousness of each risk should be decided. Now, one of the most important things that you should know is that probability and the consequences are not really related. There could be that a risk is very low to happen, but its effects should be catastrophic. Such as if you ask people a year ago that the coronavirus will basically spread in the world and it will affect all businesses at once and our economy will come to a brink of collapsing, people will probably tell you that this is a very low risk. There's very low probability that will happen if you talk to people 2 years ago and so forth. But the consequences, as you can see today, are catastrophic. It is affecting the entire global business. Everyone is damaged from this. No one is generally, apart from the certain people, nobody is actually, as in quotation marks, benefiting from this situation. So at least in our sector. So it affects, it can be counted as catastrophic. Once we have also analyzed the risk, so we decided its probability and the consequences, we need to basically develop a strategy that what we can do about this risk. Can you avoid the risk? Can we take precautions to basically minimize its effect? Can we do something about it? If this risk arises, what kind of plan will we have to address this risk? So all of these things should be considered. So when you define the risk, once you have identified the risk as a business, project, product, whatsoever, you define its probability and its effect in the second part. And in the third part, you develop a plan so that you can address this. There are 3 plans you can develop. An avoidance plans so that you can reduce the probability. The minimization strategy, which is the impact should be reduced rather than the probability. You focus on the consequences of the risk, or a little bit of the both. So if the risk arises, how do we deal with this? Finally, once you have developed your strategy, you go back and monitor even more risk. So this is an iterative process. Like I said to you many times, every single graph that we want to see in this lecture is a circle. It should come to the beginning, where no risk can be completely removed. Hence, risks need to be assessed regularly. In each step, you need to identify these risks, how can they affect you, and what we can do with this. So you can deal with this situation better when it actually happens. As you can see from this graph, risk identification is the step where you list the potential risk. You do the analysis, you decide the consequences and probability of the risks. You do the planning, such as you can decide the minimization planning or avoidance, and finally risk monitoring, where you assess more risk and you go back. This risk monitoring can go to the place where you analyze more and more risks. We already talked about this. Some people ask me in the past that how do you prioritize the risk? So basically, you can assess the risk as if it's the probability should happen is lower than 10%, is as low, very low. If it is 10 to 25, as low. 50 to 75 as high. And if it is over 75, then it is also considered as very high. The effects are more roughly the same. But you need to understand that just because the probability of a risk is very low, it doesn't mean that if effect should be insignificant. There could be a risk that the chances are very high to happen, but it is an insignificant thing. Or the opposite. There should be a risk that the probability for it to happen is very low, but the effects can be catastrophic, like the situation that we are in right now. So if for example, it's not a very good example because it's not from our sector, but if people have planned this, that a pandemic could happen, if they have taken their precautions, perhaps we could have been in a better situation. So here's an example. How do you categorize catastrophic, serious, tolerable, and even insignificant? You can say in some circumstances. So basically, if the risk is applying to more than one category and all categories at once, such as the product itself, the business, and the project, its effect can be catastrophic. So you can understand it from the way that the risk is worded. Such as, look at the first one, organization financial problems force reductions in the project. Yes, this is probably a project risk, but it also affects the business because you have no money basically. And it also affects your product because you don't have money, you cannot continue to produce. So you can categorize this as a project risk primarily. It is affecting that project, but essentially the effect is catastrophic because you have no money. There are financial problems to force. It is impossible. So this is a very strong word. Impossible to recreate stuff with the skills required to project. If you have no stuff to do the project, then what's the point of having that project? The effect is catastrophic. So this means that there's little that you can do about it anymore. It's like you have to go back. Something somewhere is not going right. So you need to consider the choices that were done at the very beginning of the project. A serious risk is something that is critical for you. So you try to prevent it to get into this step of catastrophic, such as faults in reusable software components have to be repaired before these components are reused. Changes to requirements that require major design rework. Key staff are ill at critical times. So it's not completely freezing the project. The project can still go on, but it is affecting you at a critical rate now. And if it continues further, its effects will be catastrophic. Tolerable and insignificant are the ones that you can basically tolerate to some extent, even though they are irritating. You can still, to some degree, accept them. The organization is restructured so that different managements are responsible from the project. This is a terrible decision, unfortunately happens in our industry quite often. So somewhere in the middle of the project, the management stuff changes. So you now have to deal with another management who has absolutely no idea what's going on in the project in the first place. And now he has to catch up, and just to keep him in the loop. So you have to basically do extra meetings or reduce the workload and explain him what you are doing right now and so forth. So it is an annoying issue, but it is still tolerable to some extent. So in this chapter, we had seen the practices of project management. We had seen that project managers are dealing with people, they are dealing with resources, making sure that project will meet with the scheduled time and resources. And they are also planning, estimating the time of the project using task dependencies and duration. And finally, their job is to identify, to analyze, to basically plan and monitor risks. So all of these are part of the job that managers, software managers have. They can use, of course, case tools such as GitHub, such as the graph tool that I showed you, Lucidchart, and of course, project management tools like Open Project and others to organize their activities. They also have practices in their hands, such as activity network diagrams and Gantt chart to follow these activities, either on a long term or using Kanban boards on a daily term. So you should be aware of these practices, tools, and methods, so that if one day, hopefully, if you become a team leader or a project manager in a company, you will know what to do and how to organize these activities. So I'm going to stop for today. I already did 1.5 hour lecture. Do you have any questions before I end up the lecture for today? This was an interesting subject. It was a very interesting chapter. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Do you have any questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop in here then. Next week, we're gonna continue with our course. So I will unlock the next chapter. If you wanna have a look, please read the course from your book as well. It's vitally important to read and keep yourself up to date in the book. Thank you for coming today, guys. I'll see you in the next lecture. Take good care. Bye.